In this video, learn how to use depth of field for more creative control over your photos. The depth of field is a measure of the physical distance between the closest and furthest points in a scene that will be rendered sharp in an image. With a larger depth of field, more of the scene will look sharp from front to back, while a shallower depth field will mean a smaller area in the scene will be sharp, with elements before and after your focal point blurred. The depth of field is governed by three factors: the aperture setting, the focal length on the lens, and your focusing distance. Narrower apertures, e.g. f22, stretch the depth of field, whereas wide apertures such as f4 shrink the depth of field. Wider focal length lenses capture a larger depth of field, ideal therefore for landscapes, whereas telephoto lenses have the opposite effect, making long lenses better for sports, portraits or wildlife when you want less depth of field to blur backgrounds. And finally, the depth of field also decreases at closer focusing distances, but if you focus further into a scene, depth of field will increase. So, what aperture, focal length and focal point you use affects the depth of field. Let's take a look how you control these settings on your Canon DSLR and lenses. The easiest way to control the aperture on your Canon camera is to use AV mode or aperture priority and leave the ISO around 100 or 200. You can then set the aperture and your camera will set the shutter speed for a standard exposure. Remember, wide apertures for shallow depth of field, narrow apertures for a larger depth of field. Use an aperture around f4 and a long focal length to isolate subjects against a blurred background, also known as bokeh. These seagull photos were shot on a 70-200mm lens at a focal length of 165mm. Note how the depth of field and the background birds become sharp as the apertures get narrower, starting at f4 and decreasing up to f22. The closer you focus, the shallower the depth of field, but as you focus further into a shot, depth of field gets larger. Even shooting on a fast EF50mm prime lens here at f1.4, by focusing on the man in the dock well into the scene, only the foreground is blurred. The man and the boats in the background are rendered sharp. The type of lens you use also has an effect on depth of field. As your focal length on your lens increases, depth of field decreases. In scenic shots, when you want a large depth of field to keep everything sharp from the foreground to the horizon, use a wide angle lens and a narrow aperture, such as 16mm at f22, and focus around a third into the scene. Here's our landscape shot, and we shot this at f8 at 20mm, and as you can see, everything from the foreground fence to the windmill is sharp.